chasing, leading us, and love is all we'll ever trust. Yeah, no, I don't wanna waste what's left. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, till my shadow turns to sun rays. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, and on we'll go. Finding life along the way, melodies we haven't played. No, I don't want no rest. Echoing around these walls, fighting to create a song. I don't wanna miss a beat. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, till my shadow turns to sun rays. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, and on we'll go. And we'll grow in number, fueled by them to see the horizon, turn us to thousands. And we'll grow in number, fueled by them to see the horizon, turn us to thousands. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, till my shadow turns to sun rays. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, and on we'll go. Hold me close till I get up. Time is barely on our side. I don't wanna waste what's left. The storms we chase are leading us, and love is all we'll ever trust. Yeah, no, I don't wanna waste what's left. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, till my shadow turns to sun rays. And on we'll go.
Hey, welcome everyone. Good evening. Wow, we had quite the day today. New Cisco Devnet exam was announced. We kind of knew it was coming. So it's the Devnet Expert. I'm going to quickly go over that since that's actually going to be one of my personal goals here within the next, hopefully one of the first. So sometime take it in May whenever it's first available. But so over the next few months, that'll be a personal goal of mine. So I want to just quickly review it. And for those that may not be aware of the Devnet certifications out there, the Cisco Devnet certifications, we'll go over that as well. And then we'll jump into code. So I promise this time we'll definitely be doing some coding because the to-do list is definitely adding up. So let's first start off and just look over. I have the Yeah. Okay. So I got all the documentation up, a few tabs up. So just so everyone's kind of aware, Cisco, as you know, DevNet's literally in my username. So I feel like it's I have to kind of just quickly go over this. But the Cisco Devnet program is presented. It's brought to you by Cisco, and it basically merges, kind of like what we're doing. It merges the worlds of network engineering and software development. So, if you're familiar with the Cisco certification path, you have your associate, professional, and expert levels. So, if CCNA is your associate level, CCNP is your professional, and expert is CCIE. So that's your traditional network engineer track. Hey, Narish, I think I just said Nara because I know I'm going to mess up your name. How are you doing? Thanks for putting a message in the chat. So the network engineer path, that's your traditional network engineer path, and I think many people have known about that for a while, especially if you're in network engineering. But most recently, in 2019, Cisco actually came out with this DevNet track, and DevNet standing for developer and networking. At least that's kind of the way I'm interpreting it. And so that one of the first things I did was take and pass this DevNet associate test. Literally on the first day it was available. It really wasn't for bragging rights per se, as much as how excited I was to finally have some sort of basically, there's a certification track that aids in your study habits. So, before this, DevNet, it was available. The website was available, but there was really no certifications, or I guess I could call it structured studying. So, I went through, I took that the first day, I passed it. And then just over the past year, I passed the DevNet professional exam. And, up until today, this bubble here that says new showed coming soon. So the DevNet expert, as you can imagine, is something that Cisco had to take their time on. And so they, it took a couple years, but definitely glad that it's finally out. Their DevNet Create event is next Tuesday, actually in a week from now, and they're going to have some more information on it then. But today they released some of the, the exam topics, how to, the exam format, and then some, a list of software and hardware that is going to be used in the exam environment that you could kind of lab up yourself. Hey, James. Hey, glad you're here. So James put in their past DevNet associate first day, no big deal. Yeah, I mean, no big deal. No, no, honestly, James, that was something I've been doing things with, network automation, but well before the DevNet associate came out. It wasn't something I just wanted to dive into right away because for a piece of paper. It was definitely something I was pretty passionate about. Angel, hey, how are you doing, man? He says, "Sup, bro." I definitely remember talking to you in the Art of Network Engineering, the Discord. I remember going over some of the DevNet associate content. So hey, I'm glad you're here. Thanks for tuning in. So we're going to quickly just go over the DevNet expert. Obviously, the other two, DevNet associate and professional, they've had their study guides and exam topics out for a while now. So let me just dive into those. This is the tab I wanted for it. So as Cisco's new exam format, you have a core test, or what they're calling a core test. So it's the big written test. So this is your multiple choice, multiple answer, drag and drop. But it's like your standard exam. You could take it online or at a testing location. So for the DevNet expert, it's actually the DevCore exam, and that's the name of the exam, the written exam. This is actually required if you want to go after your DevNet professional. You have to take a core exam and a specialist exam. So yeah, this exam has been out for a while, so the exam topics and study materials you can definitely go over. I'm not going to kind of take time to go over that since that's been out for a bit. So that's kind of your step one, or is what they're calling step one, pass a qualifying exam, right? And then step two is passing a lab exam. So the lab exam, for those unfamiliar with kind of the CCIE process, you have a written exam and you have a lab. Most people, if you talk to, more senior engineers, a lot of them will say, hey, I passed the CCIE written, but then they'll say, yeah, the lab is a whole other topic, right? So the lab exam, and this format may have changed. So I'm going to just refer to what the expert has outlined. It's an 8-hour exam, and I'm not sure about the DevNet expert whether it's going to be like the CCIE, because the CCIE lab exam requires you to fly or travel to a testing location. And right now they have a testing location in Richardson, Texas. They had one in RTP, which is out in North Carolina, and they also had one in San Jose, California. I don't believe RTP's open, and I'm not sure about San Jose, but I know Richardson, Texas is a testing location for the CCIE lab. So assuming that they're going to follow suit, we'll be flying out to Richardson, Texas to take this lab exam. But that's kind of TBD because we don't have that information. So, and down here, this is kind of just an easier infographic. Prepare for the lab exam. Here are the exam topics. We'll take a quick look at those. I don't want to bore everyone since, like I said, this is all public information now. And I'll actually put in the chat the, and I think it's sending. All right, it should be in both the YouTube and the Twitch chat. You can look at this page. This kind of is the center piece to the DevNet expert. So you'll see, there's the study materials, the exam topics, registration. So I found another article that was published that described the lab format. So, like I mentioned, it's an 8-hour exam. They break it down into 2 different modules per se, and one is a 3-hour design module, and that's mostly through like a web portal from what I've read. And basically you take in customer requirements, you take in application requirements, and you kind of figure out what's the best case or how to build the best tool given all the requirements. And I'm sure there's some knowledge that what's the best word to describe it? Like knowledge checks, I guess. What would you use in this situation? What would you use in that situation? But ultimately, you're designing your application, right? And then the 5-hour exam is to actually build, deploy, and maintain. And so I actually read in that one, besides the building and deploying, which is pretty straightforward, you're building and deploying the application. They also throw in some curveballs, I believe, towards the end, where they're going to require you to refactor the code. So maybe a change in requirement, that would be my biggest guess. I wouldn't think they would want you to re-architect it, but refactoring code most of the time just means that there's new requirements that weren't known before, or maybe your code, they run tests against your code and it could be written better. So, but I read that in an article, and that's kind of the way I interpreted. In that same article, I saw that the lab exam, you can register for your exam date up to 3 months before the exam. That was in the article. That wasn't really publicized too much. And this article was written by Cisco, by the way. I don't think I have it up here. Let me just pull it up so that way I'm not just recalling from memory. But it was in the Cisco Learning Network. And let me just pull it up. Topics. Did they pull it? hold on. Let me just... Okay, it's still here. Whew. Thought I was giving you guys false information. I have no clue what's happening, but I'm here to hype. Thanks with Malice. Yeah, some exciting stuff. We're talking about a new certification exam that Cisco released. So thanks for the hype for that. All right, so yeah, this is the article I'm referring to. So yeah, module 1 is your design. Module 2 is your 5-hour lab exam, develop, test, deploy, and maintain. The maintain I find pretty interesting because you'll have to, like I said, that's where your refactoring comes in. You know, given different business goals and requirements, you may have to go back through and change your code. So that'll be kind of interesting on how, you know, they score that. So they go through documentation. So they do say that they'll provide a lot of documentation. Obviously, they're going to host their own website for you to browse. They're not going to give you just, you know, the World Wide Web to browse. So, but that'll be cool, you know, because that's one thing, especially when it comes to programming. You know, even the simplest methods and libraries, no one really has any sort of memorization of those. I mean, there's some libraries I would say, you know, that or commands that we would use, but no one really remembers everything. Angel says, any expected personal tracking system or subscription for the CCIE DevNet? How would you approach this major goal? Angel, that is a very good question. I actually, and you're kind of, you know, bursting the bubble. I'm actually going to be streaming a lot of my studies with the DevNet expert. So I most likely will be taking a break from this personal project I'm working on, the NetCheck tool, and I'll be studying on stream. It won't be me reading a book. I definitely will never bore anyone with that. Everything, because it's network automation still, I'm going to have my lab set up, I'm going to have documentation set up, and I'm actually going to be trying each of these different tools that are outlined in the exam topics. So that's kind of how I'll be tracking. I will have an outline, like a written outline, probably try to write something, put it on GitHub, try to keep my notes maybe in, you know, in Git in some way, so that way you could also take a look at them. But because it's the lab exam and I have to actually do these things, I'm going to be streaming most of it. So that's kind of how I'll be approaching this major goal. So definitely over the next few months, you'll see me dive into different tools, learn things, get frustrated with things. So it'll be pretty cool. All right. I totally forgot what I was even here for. What I was looking. I have the documentation. You'll get a pass or fail. Let's see. Yeah, so this just describes, oh, you know what? It might be in the other. Oh, you know, that's actually, I take it back. It's actually in the Cisco blog. There's a public Cisco blog that was released that was more or less just kind of marketing this. And in that blog, it does say 3 months ahead of time, so up to 3 months. So if you want to be first on that list, you know, take it day one, which I'm on stream with it, but that is my goal, to take it May 2nd. We'll see where that goes, but I definitely want to be part of the first 100, I would say, to pass this exam. So yeah, the goal is to take it May 2nd. So, you know, given that math, you know, I'm looking at what, February? Yeah, February 2nd, I can actually book it. So, but we'll see. Like I said, you know, DevNet creates next week, and maybe they have some different information, but that's just kind of from what I've gathered. through the different blogs. All right, so enough of that page. Let's just quickly take a look at kind of a breakdown of the exam. So you have software design, development, deployment, and deployment. Obviously that's on there because that's what you'll be doing. Infrastructure as code, programmability, automation, containers, and security. So no big surprise. This one is big on the deployment strategy. So I mean, just based on what I'm seeing here, a lot about deployment, which makes sense, being that that's part of the second module, that 5-hour module with the lab. So, you know, but nothing, this is very high level, you know, reliability, performance, monitoring, recommend a deployment strategy. You'll notice CI/CD developments in there. I know that's like a big buzzword. A lot of people are interested in that. And a lot of people may not know what it even is. But you hear about it, especially with network automation. You hear CI/CD, you hear about Git. You know, all of this is being tested in this lab exam. So it'll be interesting. This one seems actually, I mean, this is kind of like nerdy to say, but this one kind of seems fun. Troubleshooting issues with the CI/CD pipeline. So for those that don't know, CI/CD is your continuous integration, continuous delivery, or deployment. And what that means is that's whenever you're writing software code, and let's say you save and want to deploy your changes into a production app, there's a bunch of tests that should be ran. I say should because they're not always ran, especially, you know, if you're not using any sort of development pipeline. But, you know, any change that you introduce, you want to make sure that all of your core functionalities work as expected, that your new changes basically didn't introduce any bugs. So testing's only one part of it, but I think that's the easiest to explain. There's also code linting. There's also testing your application in different environments. So, you know, using different versions of Python, using different operating systems. So if you have a application that's runs on Windows and Linux, you'll have, you know, run tests and testing on that. There's a lot that goes into a CI/CD pipeline, but the idea is, you know, you understand what that is and that you can try to find those issues. So that'll be kind of interesting. So, but that's one big chunk, 20%. 30%, I think this is the biggest just because of how many topics they cover. And as you can see here, there's a lot of topics. But I mean, you'll see REST. I mean, how many times do you see the word REST here, right? Like, I understand, like, they're different. Well, it didn't highlight everything, but you get my point. You have your REST API, RESTconf. I mean, you kind of, netconf, you have to understand all of these protocols, how they work, and also how to use them, right? So like configuring a network device using netconf or RESTconf. Yang is the modeling language or that you would use to model, you know, kind of the payload. So, you know, all of these things that you might be learning about in the DevNet Associate, the Professional, and the learning labs, like the developer.cisco.com has all these free learning labs for you to learn these technologies. And, you know, you kind of have to know what they mean, not like beyond just the acronym or, you know, maybe what port they use. You kind of really have to understand how to use them. So, this objective here, 2.10, creating a basic Cisco NSO service package. This will be interesting because NSO until recently, I haven't been able to, you know, find or use their sandboxes and their sandbox environments through developer.cisco.com. And It's interesting because it's a paid product. If you were a customer, you'd have to buy NSO. And so, I'm glad they've created sandbox environments for us to now begin testing and, like building a service package, what all goes into that. So this will be something I can tell you I don't know too much about, and I'll be very interested to see how that goes, running tests with that. All right, so that, and like I said, I'm not going to read everything. The only other thing I noticed in here when I was reviewing earlier was Terraform. So, as I'm sure you've heard, in network automation, you've heard about Ansible. And that's interesting and all, because it doesn't require, most people start with Ansible because it's agentless, which means that you don't have to install any sort of agent on your endpoint devices that you want to control or push configuration to. Which, if you have a old Cisco 3750 out in your environment, then you're not going to be able to install an agent on that device. So you're going to have to rely on just SSH in your PC to reach out to it and configure it, or grab any show commands or whatever you need to do with that device. Whereas Terraform requires an agent. It's agent based. So what that means is Terraform, you have to install an agent on your end device, and Terraform then will know how, can speak to it and run all of its configuration and whatnot. But it's very popular actually with Nexus, because it actually can utilize the Nexus API. And I haven't used Terraform in a very long time. Honestly, probably since last time I used it was studying for my DevNet Professional, which would have been back in early spring of this year. So, I mean, you're talking at least 9 months, 8-9 months with that. So yeah, I'll have to jump back into Terraform. And I know some of these tools, for example, like Puppet is another popular one. They created like minor projects, or what I would call a minor project, called like Puppet Bolt, that is agentless as well. So maybe Terraform, like I said, that's just from my interpretation of Terraform and what I've used. And so that's interesting that, they're now, you can, managing infrastructure with Terraform on this lab exam. But I also know that Cisco kind of partnered with Terraform as a provider. And that might just been a marketing ploy, but I did see that in the news a few months ago now. So that's probably why they're on the exam. But needless to say, it's very popular managing other infrastructure devices, servers. And since all network devices are practically going virtual, that would make sense. Yeah, Angel, you make a good point. So Angel says Terraform is a common tool for ACI and Hyperflex. Wondering if that's part of the exam as well. I did see that, and maybe we'll get into that. ACI, yeah. So ACI is definitely part of the exam. Hyperflex, I believe I saw as well, but that actually, and I'm just jumping to the next section here. But yeah, Angel, you make a good point. Terraform is used for ACI and Hyperflex. So, and Hyperflex kind of goes back to that, the Cisco server environment, or UCS. It's very popular with servers. So, yeah, I think that's kind of where they're going with it. I agree with you. So, yeah, network program. So this is jumping. So that was the biggest section, 30%. And as you can see, it's basically, I summarize this as how you interact with your devices, right? Because today you have APIs, you got SSH, NetConf, RESTConf. You kind of have to understand, each of those different transport methods, and then also how to model data, right? So like with REST, you might be passing a JSON payload, right? NetConf, you're going to be using XML. And you can use Yang as well with those. And then on the on the flip side, you have your standard SSH. So with SSH, you could use parsers, so the Genie library, or network to code templates. I mean, there's a ton. Text FSM. There's a bunch of different templates you could use, and when I say templates, I mean parsers, where basically it takes that raw CLI output and converts it into something that Python can use, a data format, data structure that Python can use and read. So that's kind of the way I'm reading this section is, okay, how do I communicate with my environment? All right, let's just jump to the next section here. Creating and modifying scripts. So yeah, right here. So this is how using SDKs or APIs. So here's your ACI. Now, I don't know too much about the UCS side, but I believe they're trying to integrate everything into InnerSight. So InnerSight's kind of like I don't want to say it's a newer tool, but there's a renewed focus, I know, from Cisco on InnerSight. So I believe that's what they're trying to move kind of that Hyperflex, the UCS environment into. So I think, Angel, going back to what you were saying, I think that's probably where they're going with that. Automating configuration, I think this is pretty straightforward. These will probably, it doesn't specify whether it's using netconf, resconf, yang. I'd imagine that's going to be a main focus. I don't think they'll do too much with parsing, but if they do, obviously I don't think that's too much of an issue. But I would, since everything's kind of going towards netconf or resconf and using like an actual data model language like Yang, I think that's probably where they'll lean with that. Deploying an application, so that'll be cool. Using the application hosting feature on a Cisco 9K, most likely I would say a Cisco 9K. Actually, well, I don't want to spoil it, but I think I know what device out of the software and hardware list that they provided. I think I know what device they would use with this. Modify and troubleshoot an automated test using PyATS. I think this is probably one of the only ones I could say I have. I don't want to say I have it in the bag, but I'm pretty confident with, because I've been using PyATS for months now, and I've created a parser and contributed to the Genie project. So I kind of have a pretty good understanding of how PyATS works. And yeah, some of these objectives, creating a testbed file, I think that's going to be pretty easy. Gathering current configuration operational state using Genie parsers and models. Yeah, that's done. Develop and execute test jobs and scripts using AE test. This will be interesting because there's a few ways to do this, to execute test jobs. So that'll be interesting. I got to probably dive into that just a little bit. But yeah, 3.4 seems, I don't want to say it's in the bag, but I'm pretty confident with that objective. Model-driven telemetry. I just got to revisit that. I haven't really played with model-driven telemetry since studying for the Devnet Professional. I definitely remember, and all of these topics look familiar. On-change or event-driven, how data is transferred using gRPC. All of it looks very familiar, but actually doing it, especially in a lab environment, this one's going to be a heavy topic, 3.5. And for that matter, 3.6. So this will be neat. All right. So I know I've been on this for about a half hour now, so I'm just going to quickly wrap up. And especially these are the smaller sections. So containers, pretty much Docker, and they do mention Kubernetes as well. So deploying a solution using Kubernetes. So that'll be interesting. Kubernetes website actually offers a really good tutorial. So I think that's going to be pretty cool. I think that'll be pretty neat to do. Deploying an entire solution with the secret services, that'll be a learning experience. Docker, I'm pretty confident with Docker commands. I just got to kind of review them. But yeah, 10% of the exam, not too worried about it. I'll just have to definitely dive into Kubernetes and then just review Docker. And then lastly, security. I don't think this is 15% of the exam. I don't think it's 15% because it's one of the lesser important objects. I just think it has lesser content. So, because I can imagine building out this application and then you have to, put some sort of security around it, and some sort of authentication. I mean, 5.2 is a really good example. They literally say, create a CSR using OpenSSL and send that CSR to a certificate authority, and then use that to secure your web app. Like, that's a task. That's not even like a, hey, let's study for it. That's a task. So, yeah, it's not that it's not important. It's just that it doesn't have that much actual material to it. But each of these, you could dive deep into each of these. Using tokens, headers, secrets to secure REST API. I mean, there's multiple ways to do that. But ultimately that's it. That is each of the 5 sections. Hopefully that wasn't too boring. What I might try to do is just see if I can cut that, the first 30 minutes or so of the video and maybe put that separately, kind of just my review and my take on the exam. So that way others can watch it without having to, go through this entire, this entire stream VOD. So, but yeah, that's the DevNet Expert exam. I think the only other thing I wanted to go over was the equipment and software list. I'm not going to read through these. I'm not going to go down the list. I'm just going to kind of scroll. But you'll notice, you get an Ubuntu Linux machine, a VM running 2004. You get the iOS V images, and they're both running iOS 15, which is interesting. The Cisco Catalyst 8000V running 17.5. That's interesting because that's one of the newer iOS XE images. I think probably the newest, if I stand correct. 17.5, I think that's one of the newest. And then a Nexus, and then an ACI. So actually, Angel, going back to the point you made it probably 10, 15 minutes ago, there's actually an ACI simulator on the exam. So that's interesting. But yeah, so I'll have to. My plan is I'm gonna actually build this environment in Google Cloud, in my EvenG environment that's hosted in Google Cloud, and we'll kind of go through all of those topics. That's kind of the idea. So I'll stream kind of my studying. I'll create a schedule so that way people can tune in to specific streams. I think that's probably the best way to do it. That way, if you're not interested in ACI, I don't want you to waste, an hour and a half of your time with me just going over ACI. Obviously I won't be streaming every session, because, with this, it's going to be long sessions, probably 7 days a week. So there'll be times where I don't want to set up, the whole streaming environment and then talk through it. There might just be some where, head down and kind of going at it. So, but I will definitely be streaming some of the major topics, and I might review some, previous day topics. So those are the VMs. The workstation, this tells you all the tools that are installed. I find it interesting that they have multiple IDEs. So, if you're a Vim user, go at that. If you're a VS Code user, like I am, you can do that. It even gives you the list of plugins that will be installed in VS Code. And it's pretty cool that they installed XML tools. They installed some plugins that will actually help you create, your application. Firefox, Docker, Chrome, Terraform, Postman, Nginx. So you could tell like Nginx will be installed, OpenSSL. These will be installed because I'm assuming you're going to build your application right there on the machine. NSO is going to be installed. So yeah, you can go through this list. It's pretty put together. The last thing I wanted to show you was they actually provided, it's pretty neat here, they actually provided a requirements.txt file, and that will allow me and anyone else prepping for this exam to actually basically clone the environment and all the dependencies. So yeah, and you'll see, like right here, I was trying to find where that bullet point was. Candidates aren't expected to know every single dependency provided in the file. So obviously, like, it wouldn't be worth your time to go through each Python package and look it up on PyPy and be like, okay, what does click do? You know, there'll be some like Flask, for example. You should know Flask, but yeah, you can see it's basically, and I'll actually zoom in just a little bit here. So yeah, it's just your basic, if you're familiar with Python virtual environments, my plan is I'll literally take this requirements folder, use Python 3.9, which I believe that's what they outline, and just set up an environment right in Google Cloud, and that'll be my test environment. So, but yeah, some of the notable things I see, Flask, Genie's on here, which, I mean, we kind of expected with PyTS. Some of these, like, I'm kind of just skipping, but Jinja 2, that's going to be included with Flask and some other projects. NC client, which is your netconf. NetMiko, that's awesome. I think a lot of people that start out network automation should and normally do start out with a tool like NetMiko. It's the most familiar, and it's the easiest kind of, I would say one of the lowest barriers of entry, because it uses SSH and it will print out your raw CLI. There's you can use parsers, but it's the easiest to see, okay, how does this Python, this .py file interact with my network device? So NetMiko is definitely, that's what I mean. I definitely used that when I first started as well. So NetMiko is on that list. NTC templates, that's great. You know, so you got your Genie templates, you got NTC templates. PyYang, so that's for your PyYang, your Yang modules. PyTS, as you guys know, that's one of my favorite there. PyYAML's there. So PyYAML's there for reading your YAML files. So that would be like for PyTS, for example, you may use that to read a YAML file or read your testbed file. Requests, that's for interacting with APIs. This is very interesting right here. Scrapply, that's the way I pronounce it. Probably not right. But Scrapply, that is a SSH, I don't want to call it SSH library, but it allows you to interact. It's like NetMiko in that it can interact with different network devices, but Scrapply, it's kind of like claim to fame is it's one of the fastest libraries out there, and from personal use, it's very fast. So I would highly suggest, if you haven't messed with that library, you should test it out. It's awesome. So, but that's on the lab exam. That's awesome that it made to a Cisco, an expert level lab exam, and open source library made by a community member. So that's awesome. And that doesn't take away from NetMiko and some of the other libraries that I mentioned, because NetMiko was on I believe the associate. That was actually one of the exam topics. So Angel says, maybe I missed it, but is there any Docker container related topics? Yes, there's actually an entire section on containers. I believe it's 10%. Yeah, so entire section 4.0, it's 10% of the exam. It goes into Docker and actually goes into Kubernetes as well. So you'll see 4.3 here goes into deploying a solution using Kubernetes. So yeah. So that's about it. Oh, text FSM is also there. So that kind of adds some additional templates. And yeah, that kind of wraps up some of the things I wanted to point out. Unicon there. So yeah, I mean, you got there's a little taste of everything. AIO, HTTP's there. Swag. Yeah, I mean, so some, looks like you have some async functionality as well. I didn't see, I might have to review it again. I didn't see async as a actual exam topic, but that's a pretty cool thing that, they're looking ahead at what's out there. So yeah, definitely I'll be downloading this and getting, using it to set up my my lab environment. So overall, it was great that all this information was brought out at once. I wish that some of these, like the Cisco Learning Network, I wish that there was a link to these documents that I had out here, these two. So the equipment software list and the exam format. I wish there were links in this documentation. I don't know where at, but on the developer.cisco.com site, I wish there was some links to this, because I actually had to go out and find this. I believe this one I found the lab exam format, and then Dimitri on Twitter, I actually found this link I saw him tweet out the equipment and software list. So, but it would have been nice to have in this, because I think a lot of people go to developer.cisco.com for all the DevNet certifications. So what do you know? They have it. See, I just talk it into existence. So yeah, so I'm actually on the overview page. I didn't see it across the top here. So you actually have, the exam topics and study materials, which is a page we just went over, and then the lab format and the equipment and software list. So scratch that. Scratch that. I did not see these two links here. So it looks like they do have so they got this, exam topics, equipment, yep. Boom, boom, boom. All right, yeah, so it's all there. I think I already put that. Yeah, so this is already in the chat. I'll put it once more in the chat, a link to this. So you could go there and view all the exam topics, the lab exam format, and then all of the equipment and software that are going to be in the lab environment. So, all right, now that we've gone kind of 45 minutes into it there, let's start coding. Start taking a look at our project here. So the NetCheck tool, tonight we're going to focus on adding job results to, I gotta kind of do it in order, the job results to the database, and then how we're going to return those results to, or add it as an endpoint to our API. So I don't think I went into it that much last time, but NetCheck has, since I'm using Fast API, all of this is pre-built. I didn't have to go through and create a /docs route and then do any sort of formatting with this. All this is kind of just included. And I've created the routes, obviously, but these were all kind of self-documented per se. So you see here, right now we have endpoints for getting the test results, getting a single test result, deleting a single test result. And let me see. So do try it out. Like I said, all this is built in. The try it out button, everything. So you'll see here, it does a GET request to just my localhost /API/v1 PyTS test. And I didn't really go over it, but ultimately kind of our resources, if you want to put them into categories, I have one for validation, which I'm just calling PyATS, and then one for the analysis piece, which I'm just calling Batfish. We haven't touched the Batfish part yet, so that's why I'm focusing on PyATS. So here we get a list of all of our tests, and all this is what's in the database already. So I'm trying to figure out what we had. Add validation job results to database. Oh, yeah. So these are test values. So I think I mentioned it before. So I have in main.py, I already have, see all these are just fake test results. Circuit upgrade, WAN check, L2 STP check. These are just kind of for my reference to see how a real test may look in the database. So you'll see here, circuit upgrade, WAN check, circuit upgrade, WAN check, L2 STP check. So it's a repeating pattern, right? So now what I was trying to get out of this was, okay, how do I, based on what's actually collected from a test, how do I get that added to the database? So you'll see under the HTML, and there's a few ways to do this. So, you know, as I mentioned, this is going to be an HTML app or a web app with an HTML front end, and it could be also driven by the API. So I'm trying to have feature parity, you know, basically between both interfaces, the API and the web. So within here, this is a post. And so what this does is whenever I basically press the submit button. So if I go to let me pull it up. So I click on validation, I fill out the form, and I press submit. When I press submit, then this function is what basically occurs. I mean, this is what goes down. I'm sorry, it's taken me just a second to like put things together because I haven't looked at this since the last stream. Been busy with a few other things. So yeah, so within this, you know, it takes in the device host name, the OS type, and the device IP, which if you see here, host name, device OS, and device IP. It takes in all those as parameters from the form. And you could even see that from my type hints. So it gets the timestamp, basically gets the date time that this was executed and saves it into a variable. We generate the test bed. We already went through those, what I'm calling, you know, our helper methods. And does the job results, reads the device logs, and basically it returns the data results summary. So results summary is a dictionary. And so I think what I want to do is I want to write to the database so we can clean up. I don't mind cleaning up the test results because all of those test results are saved in the database, or I'm sorry, saved in memory, and then we're going to save it into the database. And this is where I'm going to have to pull out some documentation on SQL Model. So I brought this up a couple streams ago, I believe, where the same creator of Fast API also created this library called SQL Model, and basically it works hand in hand with Fast API. You can see here, you know, it's based on type annotations, powered by Pydantic, which is a basically a type hinting data validation Python library. So this is like a pretty simple example. It's what it calls a data model, where you create a class, you call it whatever you're trying to model. So in this case, it's user. You give it, in this case, it's given an ID, which is an integer. It's given a name. If no name is given, then it's equal to John Doe. A sign up timestamp. So this just timestamps the data, and then a list of friends. So that's a data model, right? And part of this being what's called an ORM, an object relational mapper. And that's kind of where, this is where I mentioned like the documentation is like superb, is that it kind of goes over what that means. So an ORM basically allows Python to talk to a database. As you know, you may or may not know, a database uses SQL or SQL to allow you to interact with it. So a good example would be, let me just pop in here. We'll just do a list, make sure, okay, we have a database. So as you guys know, I'm using SQLite, and SQLite has a terminal, I guess you can call it an application, and this allows me to view and run SQL commands, SQL commands against the database. So I just did a command to view the tables that are available. So there's a table called test results, and this is where I'm actually running SQL. So select star basically says select everything from the table name, and table name's test results. And you'll see there's a ton. And it doesn't print it out pretty for you. There might be a way to do it, but I just don't know. But you'll see, the test name, the date time. I imagine that's success percentage, failure, number of tests ran, number of tests failed, and then I don't know what the last one is. But good news, I can run schema, I think. Yeah. So you can always, a schema is basically what a table looks like. So select star from a table name gets all the contents. And you saw how that looks. You have all your different columns here, but you have no idea what the column names are. None of this is really relevant. So you can use the schema to view like what each column is, and then the data type. So you'll see the name of it, the time it's executed, success rate, test pass. So the last one's the test integer, So I actually created within the model, it's an auto incrementing integer, which it basically uniquely identifies the table, the record. And this is, one record. So test ID 80 is significant just to this one record. And just to show you how the API reads from this database, you'll see, all right, so this one, we'll just pick on test 80. So you'll see 1944 is the timestamp. It's an L2 STP check. And going back to our API, we will say, all right, we want to try it out. The test ID is 80. So we're going to be making this API call to the fast API, the PyATS endpoint. You execute it, and boom. 1944, 07, L2, STP check, success rate, failure. So all this is taken from the database, right? And there's the record, just kind of as a quick side-by-side. I think you can see it, yeah. For the most part, you can see it. But yeah, 10, 12, 1944, 07. So yeah, so the idea is right now we just have a bunch of dummy data in the database. and we need to take the data or the test results we get from an actual test, which the tests are kicked off and ran after we click the submit button on this form. So with that, we have all the data that we need. We just now have to write it into the database. So what I'm going to do is I didn't, just to finish my discussion with ORM. ORM is kind of that glue that, or it's called an object relational mapper, which is just a mouthful, but think of it as it converts Python into communicating with an SQL database, and SQL can only speak in these terms. So, in the example, select star from hero, and this is the hero table. So, you don't, otherwise, if you didn't have an ORM, this is what you'd have to do. You'd have to actually create a string to do with the SQL commands or SQL syntax, and execute it or send those commands against the database. You leave yourself open to a lot of security vulnerabilities, and just it doesn't scale well. At the end of the day, it just doesn't scale. So an ORM kind of allows you to model and validate the data before it's written into the database. And we're using SQL Model with that. An SQL Model actually sits on top of another Python library called SQL Alchemy. And so I don't want to give all the credit to SQL Model, but SQL Model is kind of the primary library that I'm using. All right, so the easiest thing we can do is let's take a look at some of the examples. All right, so we already have the current date. We already set the current date. Let me put this back in the full image here. So we already have the current date here. We already have that set in the post function as well, so we don't really have to replicate that. These are modeling the test results class. And you can see here, I can actually look at the hints, the type hint in this box. But just for, being a literal sake, let's just take a look at the actual model. So you'll see there's a test results base class. So this actually helps define what every test, you basically have different models for each of the different functionalities, I guess you could call it, of test results. So there might be a test results where you need to read. So in that, you may, you most likely will need all of this data, whether you're reading or deleting or just adding new test results. So what you should do is put it in a base class, and the base class says, okay, anyone that wants to use all these attributes, then just inherit test results base. And not to get too deep into Python, but the inheritance and what that means is, let's pick on test results because that's actually what we will be using. Test results inherits test results base and then has an extra parameter called table equals true. So what we do is we say, all right, well, let's look at everything in our class in test results, and as you can see, the only thing we have is test underscore ID, and that's that auto incrementing ID that I showed you. And if whatever else we don't have in this class, we're also going to take a step into the test results base because we're inheriting that. And you jump into test results base, you have name executed, blah, blah, blah. So at the end of the day, you have test ID plus all of these attributes as well. Hopefully that makes sense. Like I said, it's kind of, if you know Python or if you kind of understand class inheritance and understand how the classes can be inherited, then that, it will make better sense. Angel asks, any integration in the future with MariaDB? It's similar. No, not yet. So I know that I'll be migrating to another database. I'll be moving off of SQLite most likely in the future. But for right now, it kind of just handles what I need. But yeah, I haven't looked at MariaDB. The other one I looked at was Postgres. But I have to look. I know Postgres allows JSON, and that would be my other requirement probably in the future, is to store JSON. So yeah, but I haven't looked at MariaDB. I'll definitely take a look though when that time comes. All right, so we have test results, and ultimately it has whatever's defined in its class plus all of these. So the other parameter you can guess table equals true is this model, besides being a data model. So you have two different types of models. You have a data model that validates your data. Basically, anything that you pass into this class will be validated based on the data model. And that has nothing to do with databases, SQL, or anything. That is just if you want, for example, I think this is probably the best example. I don't want to make up an example and have you try to imagine it. But let's say all test results need these attributes. Then if, for example, we skipped on success rate and it wasn't a floating number, then it would fail kind of that validation piece. And you could write, well, first I guess SQL model should catch that, or really under the hood's Pydantic. But yeah, so there's the data model. That's kind of where I'm getting at, is you define a class, you say what data gets passed into it, and what type of data. So name is a string, executed is a date time field, and then these are floats and floating numbers and integers. So it kind of helps define your class. And then there's the data. That's the data. All right, Nara said, what is the SQL library you are using? It's called SQL Model. And I'll just put a link in the chat so you can take a look at it. It's somewhat of a newer library, and I think that's what you're asking, is basically the ORM, and it's allowing me to interact with SQLite without directly executing commands. So hopefully that answers your question. If you're asking what type of SQL database, SQLite 3, and that's because it's the simplest and easiest to get up and running. And honestly, it meets my use case for right now. All right, so you have your data. That's your data model. And then there's another type of model which is called a table model. And the table model basically takes this data model and creates a table out of it in a database. So perfect that I have the schema here. You'll notice that name, executed at, success rate, failure rate, test pass, test failed, test ID. These are all, I didn't manually create each individual column, and I defined this in this table model, which you see here, called test results. And funny enough, the table is actually called test results, right? So, and you see every field, test ID, starting from the bottom, test ID, and then starting with test failed at the bottom, and then you kind of move up all the way through name. So what I did was, now we have test ID, we inherited all these other fields. This table equals true literally creates this model as an SQL database, or I'm sorry, a table inside of a database, right? So I know that's kind of, that was a lot of information, and it may make more sense as I work through it, but yeah, SQL model, right, allows us to build the data models and the table models together. So normally you would create the data models and you may have to serialize it, and then you would have to create a table model, and then that table model would then be used in the database. Well, with SQL Model, I only have one file, one models file, and I'm using it to model my data and validate my data and create a table. So I'm using it as a table model as well. And you notice that I'm only using this test results class as my only table model, right? I'm only using this one as the table model. The rest are data models still. And the reason for that is because I'm using these in my API. So, if I need to, hence why, they end in read and delete. So if I wanted to delete a test ID, I'm using this data model in my API. And real quickly, I'll show you. I know I haven't really showed the back end of this too much, but I'll just quickly show you what it looks like. And you'll be like, makes sense. Well, hopefully. Let me see where my delete is. Oh, right here. All right, so we'll do a get. Perfect. So fast, like I said, Fast API makes this super simple, and when you pair it with SQL Model, it's phenomenal. So this is a get method. Like if going back to your REST API methods, this is a get. So what I'm doing is getting the. I'm just gonna move my cursor so that way it quits getting in the way. What I'm doing is getting the test by its ID. So you'll notice the test ID in curly braces. So that's saying, all right, put whatever variable comes in, whether it be like, it has to be a floating or an integer. So, 1, 2, 3, whatever. And then you're going to, the response model goes back to the data model. So the response model, this parameter basically says, okay, well, what's the data look like that you're going to be returning? And since we're just getting a test ID, what we're doing is taking this model and we're saying, okay, well, test results read, I'm inheriting from the test results base, so I'm going to return the test ID, right, plus all of this data because I'm inheriting from test results base. So just like this one, it's this plus this. And the reason it's plus this is because I'm inheriting the test results base. Hopefully that makes sense, right? And the response model, test results read. And you'll see that's all I'm doing here. We'll get into this in a couple minutes where I'm going to dive into using the session engine and then getting, and this is basically, just think of this with block right here as I'm going into the database, I'm getting the test results that I'm looking for based on the test ID that was provided, and then if it's not found, then we'll raise an exception. So otherwise we'll return the result, and the return test result here, of course, is in the comes back as the data model right here, as the response model, I guess I should call it. And just to show you one other example, this is a delete. So the user will provide it, in the API will provide a test ID of an ID of a test I want to delete, and the response that the user will get. And whenever I say like the user's me putting this into the API, they could use, this here. Could be using like the Swagger documentation, right? That's built into the tool, or you can honestly use Postman or curl or any other way to interact with an API, any other tool that you have to interact with an API. So yeah, so that's kind of from that perspective. You're getting the test based on a test ID, and then you're deleting an ID. And just to kind of show you, so what we'll do is we'll get a single result, and let's just use 75, right? All right, so everything looks good. We got a code 200 response body. So I just showed this in the response model, right? Response model here says test results read, right here says, okay, we're going to return the test ID along with all this other information from the base. As you can see here, we return the test ID and then everything else, all this other data came from the base model. And obviously we got a 200 response code and successful response right here. So yeah, so what we'll do now is delete that test result. So we'll plug in 75. So if you were to put this into Postman, you would say localhost 8000 / API / v1 blah blah blah, and then you would just put test / 80. So you wouldn't include what's the braces is basically the value I'm plugging in right here gets substituted into where the braces are, the braces with test ID. So I'll execute this, and you'll see this tool actually uses curl. So it does a delete method. It goes against, here's the API call right here, and I know it probably is hard to read on stream. I'll just zoom in for a sec. So that's the method we're doing, and the request URL. You'll see this is the full URL. This is something you plug into Postman. And then this is the response body. We have a successful response, and it basically returns the test ID. It returns the record that you deleted. Probably that's something I will be changing in the future, but I wanted to use it for testing purposes. So, and just to verify that that's what I'm looking for, yeah, test results delete. We're going to return the test ID along with everything that's in the test results base, which is everything here. So that makes sense that we have everything returned. And just to prove that it's actually gone, we'll try to get 75 again. So we'll execute. Here you go. 404 error. Detailed, no test results found. And just to prove from the API perspective, if we try to get a test ID and if the test result's not found, we raise an HTTP exception, status code 404. No test found. No test results found, sorry. And you'll see here, no test results found. So that's my magic trick for the night. So yeah, test ID 75 no longer is there. And I was just going to show you real quick. These are all in numerical order, and you'll see 70, 71, 72, 73, 70. So you'll see test ID 74 right here. 74, 76. So 75 is gone. But just wanted to kind of show it off one more time. All right. So now that I've gone through that, that's a lot to take in. I know that's a lot I went over a lot right there, and especially if you're unfamiliar with anything I just said, you might be mind blown by all of that. You may also just be like, I had no idea what this guy's talking about at this point. But that's the point of these streams. I want to try to educate and take any questions that you may have. So if you walk away like, wow, table models, data models, SQL model, I mean, what other models, what? But that's the idea. We're going to be kind of learning as we go. So, all right. So we have that main.py. All right. So now let's get these test results from an actual test into the database. We have all the dummy data. Let's get the actual test results in. So what we do is we always use this with context manager. And what this does is, so by default, and this is when you try to do anything that kind of, think of it as like open and close. When you want to open and close a text file, or you want to open and close a database connection, you would normally have to do it manually. You would say open database connection, write to the database, save the database, close the database connection. Well, with a context manager, using this with keyword, this will actually do it for you. So anything within this with block, which I know it may be hard to see on stream, but down to line 77, you'll notice that that's everything within the with block. Once that's done executing, then the database connection will automatically be closed. And so, yeah, so the database connection's open with the with block at the very beginning, and then it's closed automatically once the with block has been, everything in it is done executing. So very neat and very handy to use. You could use this with text files, SSH connections. If you go a low-level SSH connection, actually you do use it in NetMiko. There's some tutorials out there that you would use the with context manager in NetMiko to kind of control that SSH session. So just as like a quick FYI. All right. So obviously we'll be using a with block as well. And I'll just take this whole block of code right here. So, all right, we cleaned up the data. So we generated the test bed, we got the device logs. So these are stored in memory. So let's do it before we clean up. So this cleans up the temporary directories. And I went over that last time. You'll see here, it creates a temp folder for the test bed and a temp folder for the results. So I guess before we delete those, let's do write test results to DB. All right. So the paste obviously didn't work. All right, so the results summary is actually what we're looking for. The results summary, let's go into parse PyTS. That is in validation. Yeah, so if we go down to parse, yeah, so this is the dictionary that's being returned. Success rate, total tests, test passed, test failed. Success rate, total tests, test passed, test failed. All right, so based on that, it actually might be better. Because right now I basically have the current time being stamped at the beginning of this post. And maybe what might be better is if I move that. And what I could do is I move it to, see, this is kind of where it gets a little difficult, because you want to keep these functions doing one task, and you want to keep it, you don't want to put too much in a single function, and then it gets sketchy. So what I need to do is I need to update this for the name of the test. So a couple things I need to do. And I know we're getting short on time. So let's do this. I'll write some to do. Oh, maybe I should write a comment. Nice part is the to do is in a nice bright red syntax highlighting. Some things we needed to do is add name of test, or hold on, parse out name of test and add to results. Might be easier just making a list at this point. All right. So because we need to add in, so to match up with the table, we want to pull in the name of the test result, right? So whatever test we run. So in this case, if we go to the, oh, I have too many windows open. NetCheck. So this test result, this test is called circuit upgrade. So we most likely would have the name of it, but we can pull that from, we can parse that out from the test results, from that results.json file. So I just have to figure out how to parse it out, and then we'll add it as a to this parse results. Executed at, probably just need to add the date time to parsed results. So we should move results summary. Thing is, this is the code for it. Don't think we need refresh. Might need refresh, but we'll see. Update results summary to match data model. Okay, so add date time to parse results. That's probably the best thing to do. Otherwise, I mean, I guess we could update it. I don't really want to do that. And then test ID will automatically be added, so we won't have to worry about that. The only other thing we have to add is success rate, failure. Of course. I must have made this at a different time than I made the table. Test failed, test. I do like having total test there. So what I'll do is call this one success rate, failure rate, and then because remember, this is kind of just dummy data. So now I like success rate, I like failure rate. I'm going to include total tests passed, test passed, test failed. All right, easy enough. So I just need to add in failure rate, actually. Success rate, failure rate, test passed, test failed. All right. Add total tests to guess I can be more specific instead of just update result summary. We'll say add total tests to I think it's the test results data model, right? Yeah, so the test results data model. So actually it might be adding it to the base, to be honest, because we will always want to know the number of total tests. So test results base. All right. I think I'm going to call it there. We have our to-dos. I may work on this in the background off stream. As you may or may not know, on Thursday, I'll actually be doing my first co-stream with John Capobianco. So he actually has his own kind of open source tool called Merlin. And what it does is it uses PyTS, kind of like, I'm using PyTS as well. But instead of using it for running tests, he gathers data about the network and then produces it in what he refers to as business ready documents. I shouldn't even say him referring to it. It's PDFs, I believe HTML, CSV, all these different document formats that you could hand over to your boss essentially, or whoever's asking for it really. If you have another developer asking for data in a CSV format, that tool can do it. So I'll be co-streaming with him. We'll kind of be working on adding the parser I created and contributed to the Genie project to the show license summary command. And what that is it will, if you've never ran it, basically Cisco moved to a smart licensing model, and your smart licensing basically has to register with the licensing on your device, has to register to a smart licensing server. That could be on-prem or in the cloud. Well, that's obviously super important to know if your licensing is communicating or in a authorized state and is registered and your device is registered, because at the end of the day, your licensing controls your features. Sadly, that's kind of the way it is. That could be your throughput, that could be your security features. It's a bunch of things. So anyways, show license summary command, I created a parser for it, and I'm going to be working with John and as basically adding it to his project, and he's going to kind of just walk me through the project. So it'll be very fun. It'll be a lot of conversation. We'll probably dive into some other conversations more general about network automation, how it affects the industry. It should just be a good stream. So if you can, try to join on this Thursday, the October 14th at 8 p.m., same time. But yeah, it'll be first ever co-stream, so it should be a good time. I will get all these changes as basically comments into GitHub tonight. So if you do have this cloned, this project cloned, you should be able to pull down these to-do notes. And like I said, I'll try to work on them this week, so that way by next Tuesday we'll have a little bit of a head start. So yeah, I appreciate everyone tuning in. I see that there were definitely a few people that stuck around for a majority of the stream, so I really appreciate that. Yeah, and let me know if you need anything, any questions about what I'm doing, any questions about, I know we went over the Cisco Devnet certifications. Yeah, just easiest way is to hit me up on Twitter at DevNetDan. That'll be in the outro slide as well, so if you need it for reference. But appreciate everyone hanging out, and I will talk to everyone on Thursday. Have a good night.
Hold me close till I get up.